Hello, my name is Matt Bird, and I want to welcome you to the PublishU podcast, where we explore the real life stories of authors from around the world. Today, we're talking to David Hallam from Birmingham in the United Kingdom, who has written a book called The Year Charles Was Crowned. David, welcome.
Well, welcome. It's lovely to know that I'm globally published today, that people can buy anywhere in the world.
Anywhere in the world.
Amazing. Yeah, great.
Now, David, we go back a little way because you live in Birmingham and I did my first degree in Birmingham. And I remember coming to your house one Sunday lunch.
And you had more hair then.
I had hair, and I think you were a member of the European Parliament or something, weren't you?
I was indeed at the time, yes. I was a member I was an MEP from 1994 to 1999. And I've always been involved in politics and so on. And my interest in politics stems from my Christian faith, as it happens. Some people might say that I've taken the wrong approach, but there we are.
So how did you go from ordinary person, David Hallam, to being a member of the European Parliament virtually overnight? What happened?
Well, it wasn't overnight. It was about a 30-year slog.
Really?
I worked my way up as a local councillor here in Sandwell, which is just on the edge of Birmingham. I was involved in my trades union. I was a press officer, and I found that was a very, very useful skill to have politically.
Absolutely.
And then I actually fought two parliamentary elections, two European Parliament elections before I was actually elected. So I stood in 1984, 1989, and then finally was elected in 1994. So it wasn't an overnight, but it did feel overnight because suddenly I went from somebody who nobody was interested in. I remember going to visit a local newspaper and they said they didn't have time to see me. And then the following day they're rigging up, wanting to come and send a photographer over to take a picture. It was quite interesting.
It's funny, isn't it? How fickle it is. You know, you send a few letters after your name, and everybody wants to speak to you and photograph you.
Yeah.
Oh, you've had your moment of glory. Isn't that wonderful? Now, David, you've worked a lot in communications, haven't you?
Yeah.
And come on, tell us when you wrote your first news release.
I wrote it when I was 13, and it was mainly aimed at the Hackney Gazette, and it was about
London.
In London. That's where I come from, Hackney. And we were setting up a cycle speedway club. We were all mad about speedway at the time. So we, on our bikes at 13, we couldn't get on motorbikes. So we had a cycle speedway club. I put the press release out, and rather cheekily, I sent a copy to the main London evening newspaper and the regional news for London. And the regional news for London only used it. And suddenly I had about 500 people turn up to watch this match. Very embarrassing, but we found a lot of the adults who were there actually said, we'll help you run the club. And then we got the club, and it was quite successful for about 6 or 7 years,
Amazing. The power of media.
Power of media. Yeah, you just put something in writing and you broadcast it, and you'll be just amazed the impact it has.
Well, there we go. It's a little encouragement to anybody listening. Why not knock out a little news release, send it to a couple of newspapers and see what happens? You never know. Start with your local ones, regional ones.
That's it. Absolutely. Always start at the bottom of the news chain. If you're not world famous in your local area, you ain't going to be world famous. So, start with the local newspaper, start with the free sheet, start with the parish magazine, and then send it up the food chain.
That's great advice, David. Yeah. What a brilliant tip. Gosh, we need to make sure everybody listens to this podcast for sure. So, David, you've not only put pen to paper on news releases over many years, but you put pen to paper every week, don't you, in a certain publication?
That's it. I write a weekly column for the Methodist Recorder about what's on television and radio.
Gosh. And that's the Methodist Recorder. That's like linked to the Methodist Church, is it?
Well, it's a completely independent from the Methodist Church. It's a separate company, but it feeds the appetite for news among the Methodist community in the UK and, in fact, worldwide. It's a hard copy publication, so I put it on LinkedIn and Substack as well. My column each week, which is gradually building up a readership. And I write these columns, and the trouble with newsprint and so on is that it does literally, as we used to say, wrap up tomorrow's fish and chips. So I thought, well, why don't I turn it into a book? Well,
Ah,
last year was a momentous year in British history. It's the first
it
time we had
certainly was.
crowned a king for 70 years. So I thought,
Wow.
well, why don't I bring all my articles together and put them into one book and publish them and just see what happens.
Wow.
You know,
And
and it means I
that's
get
how the year Charles was crowned came
was
into being.
laid out, and it means that people invite me to go and give them talks about the year, which is interesting. Some people buy it out of nostalgia,
Yeah.
and my relatives all expect a free copy, which is a flaming nuisance. But there we are. That's the way
You
life
chose
is.
your words very carefully, David.
That's the way life
Very
is.
Christian. That was very
Yeah,
controlled of
yeah,
you.
yeah.
So, apart from Charles being crowned, what were your top three news highlights of 2023?
Importance. I think the various sporting events were important, but sadly, because of the way in which the newspapers produced, I can't write about a sporting event because that's long afterwards. But I think the highlight for me was just seeing my local news stories and great things with people doing things locally. I believe, and that's one of the difficulties, because every now and then I want to write stories. I see something and I think, well, on regional television, and that make a great story. And often I can't use them,
Yeah.
because it's a national newspaper. But I try and get a bit of local stuff in if I can.
Yeah. The bottom to the top, as you always say.
Yeah, yep, absolutely, absolutely.
And is that your view in politics as well, David? I'm jumping to one side again here.
Well, you have to, if you have an election, you have to be prepared to fight on your local street. You have to get your neighbours on your side. You have to get people with you. And it's very interesting when you're doing political campaigning and you go round and you knock on doors. I've got a friend called Liam Byrne, who's the MP over in Hodge Hill in Birmingham. And I always tell him that for him, it's quite clear the doorstep is a sacred space, because he will go on the doorstep and he will talk to people at great length. And I really admire that. And he
Yeah.
always listens. In fact, he's got this habit of listening twice as much as he speaks, which
Well, it's a
is
good principle, that, isn't
a
it?
good one. Absolutely, absolutely.
I
Yeah.
remember when I was a councillor in local government in the London borough of Merton,
All
and
right.
once a month on a Saturday.
I dread to think which party you were, but never mind.
Yeah, we share some things in common, David, but we differ on others.
Okay.
Anyway, once a month, I'd pick a street in my
Yeah.
ward, and I'd go and knock on doors. And I loved meeting people, listening to people, learnt so much. And they'd often say in the first few moments, but when's the election? And I say, well, there's just been one. There isn't one. We don't know yet.
Yeah.
I said, well, why are you here? I said, well,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm here because I'm your local representative. And if
Yeah.
you've got stuff that you need help with in the community, that's what I'm here for. So regardless of your party politics and regardless of my party politics, I represent you. And it was amazing the response I'd get from people on the doorsteps.
Yeah. Well, I do help an MP with her surgeries once a month,
Yeah.
and I don't get involved in the cases, but people often they come and they see me, and while they're waiting, they pour their hearts out about some of the problems they've got, and you just be amazed just how hard it is for people at the moment in all sorts of ways. And
Mm.
that's one of the things which I think I hope I reflect in my book, that
Yeah.
2023 was a really very, very hard year for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Prices were going up, mortgages were going up, and we got some intractable problems about housing and asylum and so on in this country. So I hope that I picked that up in my book as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Very, very good. Now, David, you've written, in local newspaper, you still do.
Yeah.
You've done lots of national European media as a member of European Parliament. Recently, I met a younger person at an event, and they said, "I want to write."
Well, there's only
And
one. There's only one way to start writing, and that's to get a piece of paper. We used to say the old typewriter, but you have to put it on paper.
Yeah.
And my strong advice
Yeah.
is when you start writing, you write on the basis that the first paragraph will not be perfect. If you start thinking it's got to be perfect, then you finish. What you do is you write as much as you can down, and then you worry about getting it perfected. In other words, writing this idea. If you go to the British Library and you look at Jane Austen's original manuscripts or whatever, or anybody's original manuscripts, you'll see there's lots of scrawling out, and there's lots of words put in, and there's all sorts of things, and lots of notes in the margin. Well, that's what you have to do when you write. The most difficult moment I have when I write my column, it has to be 900 words. And
Exactly. More or less.
exactly. Now, I think sometimes it's 896 and sometimes it's 205, but it's a really good discipline that right at the very end, I'm going through and I'm trying to take the odd word out and the odd word in and so on. And that discipline right at the very end of the process means that I have to read it very carefully all over again. And that is actually probably more challenging than writing the first couple of paragraphs.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
Yeah.
it's also a good discipline because it means that you go through, and as you go through, you see that you've made a spelling error here.
Yeah.
I mean, the other day, for example, I invited somebody to my site. I said, you must go onto my site. And I spelt it
Website.
my site, yes. SIGHT, where on earth did that come from? That should not have happened, but it does. It does. And I still haven't worked out how to spell neighbour. I just cannot spell neighbour.
You need to spell. I run a charity and we spell it the Belize Creole way, Nayba.
Oh,
Neighbour.
right. That sounds a good
Slightly more
idea.
attitude to it. But
Sounds a
let
good
me
idea.
come back to your point.
Yeah.
When I coach people to write their books, I always say, write your entire book without editing a word.
Oh, right. That's interesting.
And
Yeah.
then go back and do the editing process. And I was with a top journalist from the Times last week, and they said exactly the same. Do
Yeah.
not edit, do not try and perfect it as you go. Write the whole
No,
thing, whether it's an
no.
article or a book, and then go back and do the editing.
When you've got something on paper, you've got something to start with. And that's your raw material. And if there's raw emotion in it, that's even better still. And people like emotion in writing, and you're not writing a committee paper. You're actually writing usually about something you feel passionately about.
Yeah,
And part of that is the passion of
yeah,
it.
yeah. And this comes through in your book, David, that what
All
you
right.
write about, you're passionate about.
Well,
And
every now and then, I must admit, every now and then I'm a little bit provocative.
you are.
And they've had a couple of complaints, let's say, for the Methodist Recorder. But that's good. I mean, at least people are reading, and it means they're reacting. And,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
what
Yeah.
you write to. You write to get a reaction. And I would say often people say to me, what I'd like to my life story. And my argument is, write it down, even if at the end of the day it's just 20 page of foolscap. Go down to the local copy shop, print off 20 copies, give it to your grandchildren, and put one in the local library. And the one in the local library will be absolute gold dust to a local historian in 100 years' time. And they'll be so delighted you've written it. So just put it down on paper. Don't be afraid of paper. It's a fantastic place to put it.
Yeah.
Or put it on, obviously these days you put it on, you put it online. But my strong advice to everybody is, if you put something online, you run a hard copy of it. Don't worry about or put it on a memory stick, put it on a disc, put it on a floppy disk. Remember those?
Disc.
Technology will overtake you, but make sure you've got a hard copy of it.
Yeah, absolutely. There we go, David. So, David, thank you. You've given us so many little gems today about writing, media, and talking about your amazing book. What is your hope for your latest book, David? The Year Charles was Crowned. What do you hope will come of it?
Well, I hope people read it, and I hope people see it as a souvenir.
Yeah.
And I hope actually that what I'm doing is I'm building up an archive of often quite quirky programs that you can find on iPlayer. I mean, one of the things which really impressed me last year was the Shakespeare series on the BBC. We've got some amazing Shakespeare plays that have been done over the last 50 years, all on iPlayer, all waiting to be watched. And in fact, one of my hopes is that one day we will have a Shakespeare channel which will
Oh,
produce these day in, day out on Freeview, on satellite, and so on, and really use Britain's soft power as the producer of one of the greatest playwrights. And in
there we
fact,
go.
I'm hoping the press release in which I say this is at this moment hitting the news desks and may even give me a line or two.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you all for listening to the PublishU podcast, featuring the real life stories of authors from around the world. If you're interested in becoming an author like David, please visit our website. Make sure you subscribe for more. Thank you so much for joining us, and goodbye for now.
Goodbye.